Well, let me pray, and then we'll get into this message. Lord, thank you for this day and this chance just to share your word and another great story of you and teaching from you. I pray you speak to me and through me. I want to be changed by you and by what you have for me, and I want us to hear what you have for us today. So I just pray you'd work here through this message. In your holy name, amen. Real quick, this has nothing to do with the message. I just want to get it off my chest. I learned something recently about young people. And young people is, I think, qualify for this conversation, anyone born after 2000. I recently learned, so I'm born in 72, 80s were kind of my decade, this decade of music and cool stuff. Young people, this is, so all you who aren't young, this is for you to know. This is what's happening. This is the state of our world today. They're referring to things that happened in the 1980s and 1990s as the late 1900s. So like industrial age kind of terms, right? So expecting smog and child labor to increase, like that kind of thing, right? There's going to be railroads everywhere. The late 1900s, so I heard that a couple days ago, and I just, I'm stuck right there. So it's like, it's not untrue. It just is, it's sad. So has nothing to do. That'll probably be edited out of the video. But today we continue to go back to our Matthew series, and we're in Matthew 18. Before we put the passage up there, one of the things that is challenging, I think this passage is going to reveal some of that, is like one of the things that's challenging about being a Christian is kind of knowing, like, how do you live this stuff out, right? I once heard it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's like, don't live like Jesus at work or you'll get fired. Like, don't go turn tables, right? If you're like, I don't like this decision, like, don't do that kind of thing. Don't bring a whip to work if the boss is making some calls that you don't like. Like, how do you do this stuff, like, in real life? And yet that's the calling, right? Like, we don't just kind of read it and go like, that's nice, and then move on. We really need our calling is to apply this stuff, to live this out, to follow Jesus and live like Jesus. And that's hard. It's hard because we get lots of messages about what Jesus was like, and those sometimes don't mesh up with what cultures around the world, not just our culture, say. So how do we do this? This passage is speaking specifically to Christian leaders, to the disciples, but it's for all of us. So I want us to kind of to wrestle with that a little bit. Like, what does it mean really to live like Jesus? And that probably means not living like, or not acting or behaving or relating like I have been, right? So what is natural for me? Hopefully that makes sense to me. But sometimes, and we're going to talk about humility. And one of the problems with humility is it looks like weakness to us sometimes. You know? We say, well, no, we should be humble, but then we kind of celebrate people who are very unhumble. Right? I mean, that's just true. And we don't seem to expect humility in our leaders, and yet that is not what Jesus has for the world and for us. I mean, when I mean the world, I mean all humans. So, but that isn't what we see in Jesus. So how do we live that out in a way that is radically countercultural? That is the calling. Let's get into this. Matthew 18, 1 through 6. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." Now, there is some parts of this passage we will not fully unpack today. It'll kind of lead into next week's as well, so there'll be these things will add up a bit. But I just want to unpack some of this morning. And it's been a couple weeks since I preached, so the words might come fast and furious. I'm just excited to be back up here doing this. Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? This seems to be about the kingdom then. Like the disciples, this is the disciples asking, so this is Jesus's top guys, right? The people that know him best, that have the best chance of getting things right? They've been walking with him, and they're asking about this. And it doesn't seem to be about, like, when the new heaven and new earth are established, like, once all things are made right, who's the greatest? But, like, right now, who's the greatest? This, in your kingdom, your king, who's the greatest? It seems to be that they're asking about that. This kingdom Jesus is setting up right then. Jesus had already made it clear that Peter would continue to lead, that Peter, James, and John were with him on the mountain. So they understand the role of leadership. Like, even in the context of humility, there are leadership roles everywhere. Like, leadership is part of life. So it isn't that we aren't supposed to be leaders. Jesus was the leader of this band of knuckleheads. But how do we do this? So they understood leadership. So that's interesting that they would ask this question, because at least in Matthew's telling, this is pretty close to after the transfiguration story that just happened. In my worldview, that was 3 weeks ago. It was over here, and then the future is over here, apparently. So that's where I'm putting those things. So we talked about this thing a couple weeks ago, this transfiguration, and Peter, James, and John are up there, and so we know that they're leaders, so they understand that Peter, James, and John are significant people in their group. They know this is well established, but who's the greatest? They had come to accept that Jesus was the Messiah, and he was setting up a new thing. So who's going to get the big jobs? Who's your favorite? Like, can you tell us who's your favorite, Jesus? One commentator named Barclay wrote this: the very fact that they had asked that question showed that they had no idea at all what the kingdom of heaven was. The fact that they're asking this question suggests that they've missed the point entirely. So Jesus calls a child, and he put the child in the midst of them, like, here. I think, as you know, I like to sort of picture these scenes. Like, this really happened. We have every reason to believe that this thing really happened. It isn't just some story. Sometimes Jesus tells stories to make a point. That's okay. This is likely pretty close to what happened, right? So there's Jesus and his disciples and probably some other people kind of circling around. They're asking questions, trying to understand, like jockeying for position. But clearly there were kids nearby, right? So they're waiting for all the boring talk to get over, and then we can have some fun, right? So they kind of know. So you pictured this. I pictured a group of people, probably mostly men, and kids kind of looking between the legs, like, are they done yet? Like, this is so lame. Can we have some fun? Children seem to feel safe around Jesus. We'll get into that in a moment. That's significant. That's a huge deal. See, lepers called out to Jesus. Blind men followed Jesus. Bleeding women reached out to touch him. And children seemed to know he was good for a bit of candy, a magic trick, a funny story, or a game. I think Jesus was fun. I really do. I think he was fun. Otherwise, kids wouldn't have been around. And kids seem to be around a lot, which is not normal in this context. So he brings a child, because there's a child nearby, and that child clearly feels like, despite all these lame adults, I can come safely to Jesus. Things are cool when Jesus is around. This is not a normal context. This wouldn't normally happen. You wouldn't have children that are safe in this environment, right? They wouldn't have been doing this, and yet they do. They go to Jesus. And he says, become like a child. What does that mean, to become like a child? It means I can wear the same t-shirt with Kool-Aid stains day after day, like things like that. Sweet, right? What does it mean? A few weeks ago, we talked about the mustard seed passage. It happens right after the transfiguration story. Jesus and Peter, James, and John come down from the mountain, and this father says, hey, can you pray for my sick son? And Jesus casts out a demon, and he says, why couldn't your disciples do it? They tried. We assume it's the other 9. So 9 of the top 12 people, best trained people, why couldn't they do it? Jesus calls them a faithless and twisted generation. He tells them they could move mountains if they only had a little faith, the faith the size of a mustard seed. We connected that to other instances where people were called out, not for lack of faith, but for the wrong kind of faith, or rather faith in the wrong kind of God. I think this is similar. The disciples are concerned about rank and power and authority, and they seem to think that with more rank comes more of the kingdom, more of Jesus. But it doesn't always work that way. Jesus died for and at the hands of his enemies. Jesus washed feet. That's the model for all of us. We don't really see Christian leaders acting like this. And Christians don't expect that kind of attitude or self-understanding of the people that we follow. But that is the model. In fact, we might actually be confused if we saw someone acting like this, or if our boss acted this way, or the keynote speaker, the celebrated international keynote speaker acted this way. That might be really confusing. Perhaps that's why there's no kids hanging around. Kids seem to get it. More authority often means less humility and greater confidence in giftings and connection and influence. Higher rank often means less vulnerability. Jesus' followers who are concerned about position and image are not available to lepers and prostitutes and bleeding women. But children? Children know they depend on their caregivers. They know they need help. They take comfort in the different roles. And children often see us as we really are. I think the children in Jesus' life understood him better than his disciples did. If they had a child's mind, they would have seen Jesus as the God he is, the one who modeled humility and graciousness. In Philippians 2, Paul wrote it this way: "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Verse 5 says right there at the beginning, "Have this in mind." Remember this. Think about this. Let this affect how you view yourself, your neighbor, your world. Think this way. It's hard to think that way, though, isn't it? Like, how do I do that? But that's the calling. Have this in mind. Follow Jesus. Jesus emptied himself, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. He gave up everything. The creator of all things became a servant. Well, if he can do it, right, and drop down that much lower, maybe I can too. Maybe I should too. There's this bit about the millstone. Sometimes Jesus is hard to understand. We read passages and we're like, I don't know what that means, right? And I'll admit, sometimes there are messages that are easier to prepare for because you understand some things. We know some things. And I always do research, but sometimes you have to do more. Other passages are, some passages are really hard to understand, and some are pretty easy. This is one of those ones I think is pretty easy. Like, we know how Jesus feels in this passage, right? It's better that you drown. So we can show a picture of a millstone. This is what we got. So it kind of looks like this. So would you believe it if I told you I drew that one on the right? You should not believe that. But a millstone couldn't weigh 1,000 or more pounds, and they would strap a donkey to it, and the donkey would walk in circles, pretty boring life, and they would grind grain, right? That's what it was for. So this is pretty dramatic, right? It's better that you be like really, really drowned, like not just a little bit drowned, but like really, really drowned with 1,000 pounds around your neck, than you get in the way of a kid coming to me. Okay, so how do you feel about kids, Jesus? Like, there's no confusion here, right? We understand. This doesn't appear to be a common saying. I didn't find anywhere that this is a thing that people said. Sometimes even Jesus says things that are kind of common sayings. This is the kind of way we talk about X, Y, and Z. Every culture has their little idioms, right? This doesn't seem to be a cultural idiom. This is like, no. And I think it's very possible there was a millstone maybe nearby. It's better that you have that around your neck and go to the Sea of Galilee than you try to get this kid off my lap, because we're about to play a game. And this is what it's about. I don't think the point is that Jesus is going to drown all the bad guys. I don't think that's the point. And I don't think, while we could always use more help with kids, this doesn't mean you all better sign up for kids ministry lest you be drowned later today. That is not what we're saying. I don't think that's what this is trying to say. I think the point is that Jesus is on the side of the defenseless. And when we're not on the side of the defenseless, we're opposite him. I mentioned a few weeks ago that there's been a tone change in this gospel. And Jesus is now beginning to call us to choose. You can choose me and my kingdom or something else. And this is one of those moments. Are you going to live this way or not? This is what it looks like. If you don't want to do this, you're doing something else. I'm over here with these people doing these kinds of things. It's a tone change. Christianity has been in decline in this country for a few decades. In Europe, it's considered to be post-Christian already. And we're headed in that direction. There's always ebbs and flows, but we're headed in that direction. I sometimes hear the reasons for this situation, like this reality. And you don't have to like what I just said, but the numbers are saying that. The reasons that we often give are always external. Those people, the right, the left, the liberal theologians, the commies, the kid of the 80s. Those could blame everything on the commies. It was great. It's always external, right? The problems are always external. But I have to wonder if some of the problems is that we in the American church have forgotten some of these very consistent principles that Jesus makes clear. I am here for the defenseless. I am here for the gospel is good news for the prisoner and the blind and the poor, the bleeding woman, the Samaritan woman, the kids. And when we forget that, to that degree that we forget that, or resist that, to that much degree, we're on the opposite side of the line of Jesus. So perhaps we as an American church need to look inward. Are the causes of decline our own, right? I think that's a fair question. Rather than looking at they, them, can we look at us and me, right? Is it us? I want to jump ahead to Matthew 19. There's a similar passage. Then children were brought to him that he might lay hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people. So people are bringing their kids to Jesus. Can you please pray for my kid? But Jesus said, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. And he laid hands on them and went away. This is an interesting moment. Jesus had just finished talking about divorce. So there's this crowd of people hearing him talk about divorce. We're not going to go into that passage because there's a similar passage during the Sermon on the Mount, which we covered 8 months ago, something like that. So I'm not going to cover that passage in depth. But just like a quick update or brief, the culture had allowed husbands to sign a certificate of divorce. At any point, remember the story of when Mary finds out she's pregnant, Joseph was going to give her a certificate of divorce. So she's betrothal engagement was different than we would do it now. Is being betrothed, you might not be living together, but you're contractually bound at that point. So Joseph is like, this is not good. I'm just going to give her a certificate and I'm just going to go away, right? Just going to go. He's trying to be as honorable as he can in this scandalous situation of his young bride-to-be is pregnant by the Holy Spirit, because, right, that's how that works. So he's trying to just do that. This was culturally acceptable. And a husband could divorce his wife for any reason. She's not pretty enough anymore. She's doesn't cook well, she's whatever it is. I just found someone I like better. Any reason. Could write a certificate of divorce and just move on. Problem is, women didn't have really any other recourse. Like, they're dependent on their husband for provision or their family. So, divorced women, and let's assume this isn't some kind of scandal, it's just, he just is done, which is really one of the big problems Jesus is addressing in the passage. She has few options. She can remarry, that's possible, but she'll be treated as a second-class citizen in that home because this new husband will act like he's done her a favor. She's basically a servant in his home. She might go back and live with her family, but the whole idea is that you're going to unburden us by getting married and starting your own family, and then she's also, a burden and treated poorly. Or she can beg and or be a prostitute. Those are the options. That is what the system set up. And then, of course, what do you do with prostitutes? Well, you treat them poorly because they're subhuman, right? That's like most cultures don't celebrate the prostitutes. So this culture had set up a system that allowed men to impoverish women and then abuse them for that. That's what Jesus is addressing in the teaching on divorce. He's basically saying, grow up, dudes. Man up. Take responsibility, right? So he's calling the men out. And then this thing happens with the kids. Interesting. This teaching on divorce is a controversial message at any point in history because men don't really like to be called out. We get it from Adam. It's not my fault, it's hers. It's not her fault. It's really yours, God. And Adam's like, bruh, it's you. It's all you, and work is going to be hard. And it is. So we get this kind of, I just want to pass off responsibility. So he teaches this thing that is probably irking a lot of people, and we just don't like this. And, the disciples even said, well, should we even get married ever? It's like, the answer is not, you don't have to get married. The answer is not that. The answer is, grow up, guys. That's what he's saying. And then he spends some time with children. Again, just the next chapter. And we don't know how close this is to the first chapter or first passage we read in 18, but in Matthew's telling, they seem to be pretty close to one another. Twice, pretty close in time, he's spending time with kids again. You see, children were considered property. You could do whatever you wanted to kids, really, even your own kids. Like, they didn't matter, really, until they become adults. In Greek culture, which, even though they're under Roman rule, Greek culture heavily influenced, Israel was first taken over by Alexander, right? And so the culture is all influenced by Greek and Rome culture. You could have, upper class men could have boys as sex slaves. Totally acceptable. These sex slaves were treated like slaves. They were often dirty. They weren't fed well. They just served the interests of this man who had a family, so they would sometimes live in part of the house, usually not in good accommodations. These slaves were considered expired when they hit puberty. This is the culture. So even though Israel was under Roman rule, it was under Greek rule first, and Rome was highly influenced by Athens. So then Jesus is hanging out with kids, though. And he's saying, this is where it's at. Be like them. They're not property. They're to be loved. They're to be adored. They're to be learned from. We hear in other parts of Scripture, out of the mouth of babes, right? This is the second time in as many chapters that Jesus has said the same kind of thing. It seems this was a common experience, a theme that even his closest followers couldn't understand. Remember, in this passage, you see it, the disciples are rebuking the people for bringing their kids to Jesus to pray for them. They just can't get it. We just talked about this, guys, right? This seems to fit in Jesus' overall ethic, defend the defenseless. What do the defenseless understand? They understand they need help. Jesus is specifically addressing the apostles, the disciples, who we know later as the apostles. He's specifically talking to them as Christian leaders that he's training, but it's for us as well. Christian leaders often lose the plot. We see the vulnerable love of Jesus, and this costs Jesus something. And we exchange that for power and influence. Why do we do that? Because we've received so much grace and mercy and love. Why would we then change tactics? I think it's easier. It's easier to lead by power and influence and authority than vulnerability and love. Again, months ago, we talked about John the Baptist. Remember him? He described himself as the best man. If Jesus is the groom, John was the best man. And Jesus said that his cousin John was the greatest human to have ever lived up until that point in history. John was the real deal. He was a hero in sackcloth and locust legs and honey stuck in his beard. He was as close to fearless as you can get. He baptized Jesus and he challenged rulers. Cost him his life. He was the stuff and the jazz. He was it. But as Jesus' ministry grew, John stepped back. He said, he must increase and I must decrease. In other words, John knew that and lived the fact that it's all about Jesus, and he turned the attention from himself to he who saves. Worship team, if you want to come up. To be a child, to know who he is and to know who we are, and to be content with that. That's the goal. That's the mission. That's the calling. To be a child, to know who he is, and to know who we are. And to know who each one of us is. Someone loved by God. To be content with that. Jesus asked Peter, who do you say that I am? And Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you. On this fact, I will build my church. When we forget who God is, we lose who we are. We put our faith in people who are drawn more to political, financial, and military power than the God who died on a cross. We do things in Jesus' name, but not really. Jesus calls us to be like children, to defend the defenseless, to recognize that while we may have a certain amount of influence or affluence, we are all in need of a defender. And then we're called to partner with him in that work. And that costs me something. But when I picture that, perhaps one of those kids had been someone's slave, and just like, hey, come, we'll get rid of these lame adults. I got a game I want to show you. I think, yeah, that feels right. It feels like Jesus. And I want to be like that, you know? I want to be the guy that is humbled by Jesus' humility and walks in that. And just lets myself be used by him so that other people can meet him. And meet him as he is, not as we talk about him as some John Wayne character, but as Jesus who sat, the creator of heaven and earth, who sat in the dirt and played with kids and all their stickiness and silliness. He did other things. But when stories or teaching comes up repeatedly, that's a clue to us, right? Like this story happens in multiple times in different ways, but the same idea. Let the kids come to me. They get it. And then watch them. Learn from them. Well, they're undignified. They're whatever. They get it. Right? And so when you see these things creeping up over and over again, that's a clue. Like, this is probably pretty important. I should really learn from this. I should really think about this. And I just think, how many missed opportunities I've had because I was protected myself, I guarded myself, wasn't vulnerable, didn't risk. I mean, it's scary to risk, right? It might not work, it might not land, it might not make sense, it might be awkward. But when I picture Jesus, telling me, get out of the way, I want to play with the kids. I'm like, gosh, I want to be like that. That scene might not happen literally for any one of us, or rarely for any one of us, but we have scenes, we have people in our lives with whom we've kind of maybe withheld a little bit of love, withheld a little grace, withheld a little hope, encouragement. So let's stand. We're going to sing Build My Life. We sang things like, I sought the Lord, and he answered. I trust in God. This is what it means. Not just I trust in God for that financial blessing I need. That's a real thing. But I trust you. When you say the humble life is the better life, I don't like that, Jesus, but I'm going to trust you. And I want to know how to do that. I want to build my life on you. When we sing I trust you, we're saying we trust him with these kinds of things too, right? But that's hard. It's hard to let go. You may say, well, I'm not as proud as the other guy. Well, by saying that, yeah, you are. Right? But when I picture more and more people living like that, I think, wow, this thing that Jesus is trying to build, how neat is that? You know? So, as always, I encourage you, there might be something that you need to pray about during the song, then go ahead and pray. It might be something you need to confess or give. There's prayer team, if you want to go to the prayer room, I think they're gathering. There'll be people in the prayer room that are there to pray with you. It could be about what I've been talking about. Anything else, they're there to pray with you. But let's make ourselves available for Jesus to remake us more and more in his image. We're going to sing Build My Life. Build my life, right? I'm going to build my life on you. Let's just take another step in that direction today.